So in this case, George will be sent out the first outlet, the right-hand outlet, and then the list that you've sent to the trigger object will be sent out of the left-hand outlet. So sorry, complicated explanation, but one that, it is quite a useful object to use, which is why I've used it a couple of times here. And now that I've explained all of that, so here, whenever we press a 0, apart from the message being sent to the col, which obviously we'll look at in a minute, the message also is sent to this trigger object, which first of all sends a clear message to the buffer object, and then a bang to set my buff to remind these waveform objects that they are referring to the buffer object. I'm not sure that that's necessarily entirely necessary, but that's the way I've done it. So that's this top right hand part of the patch, fairly obvious and straightforward, I think. Then we have each of these numbers in the message boxes connected to this col object, and the col contains, I like the patch, these numbers. So against each index we have a series of 4 numbers between 0 and 1. And you can imagine that each of these 4 numbers somehow is referring to what might be happening in the buffer, but obviously it has to go through a series of other objects to make them behave in particular ways. But that's what I will explain now. So this section here, the patch, is the recording component, if you like, and this bit down here is the playback, which I'll come back to. So we've got a record object, which is currently, or by default, referring to my buff 1, so this first buffer up here. And we have an ADC, we just have a mono ADC input that's running through a gain control, so that we can obviously choose the gain. There's a I think I might have mentioned the load bang object. The load mess object is load message upon loading the patch. So as soon as the patch loads, the message 127 will be sent out into the gain object, which obviously initializes it to a value of 127. So that's this bit down here. So what's happening here? Well, this is the process, or the part which tells the record object how to behave and which buffer to read to, or to record to. I should explain one other thing about the col object, which is that the outlets, we've only used the left-hand outlet so far, which basically sends out the whatever's stored at the index that you send. So if I were to send a 0, we get 4 zeros coming out the left-hand side. If I were to send a 1, we get 0, 0, 0, 0 again coming out the left-hand side. If I were to send 2, I'd get 1, 0, 0, 0 coming out the left-hand side. The second outlet sends out, well, you see it there, number or symbol associated with the data. So it basically sends out the index. So if I were to send a 0 in, then 4 zeros would come out the left-hand side, and a 0 would come out of the second outlet. If I were to send, I don't know, let's say a 3, then 1100 would be sent out of the left-hand side, and the index, which is 3, obviously, would be sent out the second outlet. So in fact what I could have done was simply to send these number boxes straight to here, but I didn't because it looked neater to do it this way. So these are being sent into a select object, and they, 2 of those numbers will be selected, and then the other 4, so 1, 2, 3 and 4, will be sent out the right outlet, which, if you remember, sends out the input if the input doesn't match. So those go into this, again, a trigger object, which means, and again, this is a useful ordering thing, because what we want to do now is to say, to tell the record object which buffer to refer to, and that's exactly what this is doing. So the number So let's say it's number 1 that comes out of here. So the index we choose is number 1. That comes into here. It isn't recognised by the select object, so it goes into the trigger object. And so this I is replaced by the number 1 because that's the one that's coming through. And it goes into this uMenu object. And if you remember, uMenu allows you to store a number of items in a list, or sorry, in a drop-down menu. And each one of those is accorded again a kind of index. So auth would be given at number 0, mybuff1 would be given a number 1, mybuff2 would be given a number 2, and so on. Well, if you remember, we've got a 1 coming into there, so it would choose mybuff1. Now, thus far, when we've been using the uMenu, we've sent stuff out of the left-hand outlet. The left-hand outlet sends out a number, the number that's associated with whatever name you've got in here. So it would be 1 again, but we don't want that. We actually want the symbol, which is mybuff1, to come out. And that comes out of the middle outlet. So that's exactly what I've got going on here. So when the 1 comes into here, it chooses mybuff1, the message mybuff1, or the symbol, comes out into prepend set, which is a bit like putting set $1 in a message box. It puts set in front of the message that we've got coming in. So the message that comes out of here would be set mybuff1. So record is set to mybuff1. Well, it is already there by default, but of course, if we would send number 2 from here, then col would send out 2 as the index. It would be throughput through select into the trigger object. So this I character would be replaced by a number 2 into here and choose number 2, which is mybuff2, which is prepended with set. So we get set mybuff2 into the record object. Record is replaced by set mybuff2, and it will be ready to record into the second buffer. I know I really appreciate this is very long-winded, but I hope it makes sense anyway. At the same time, of course, or immediately after this message has been sent to tell the record object which buffer to record into, we have a 1 message that is sent to this toggle object and throughput through the toggle object into record. So that means that as soon as the record object has been told which buffer to refer to, it's told to start recording. Okay? But again, I'm saying as soon as. It happens immediately afterwards, because we need to set which buffer to record to before we start recording, otherwise it will record to the wrong buffer. So 1 would tell it to read or write to buffer mybuff1 and tell it immediately to start recording. 2 would send it mybuff2 and then start recording. 3 would send it mybuff3 and then start recording, and then 4 would send it mybuff4 and then start recording. So that, again, hopefully is fairly straightforward. The numbers 0 and 5, of course, we don't want to record anything at all. So those are selected by the select object and sent to a T0, so a trigger 0 message, which turns the record function off. So we don't record anything at all. No matter which buffer we've got selected in there, nothing's going to record. So that's this portion of the patch. So the playback component, which is down here, is, again, hopefully fairly straightforward. This time we've got the 4 numbers that come out of, or that are stored in col against each index, coming out of the left-hand side into the unpack object. And those, depending on which number we've chosen, will tell us, or tell the groove object, which one to play. And again, we've got 4 groove objects down here, each one corresponding with the buffers that we've got up on the right-hand side here. Each one is set to play back at normal speed, so sig message, or the signal object, is sending a constant value of 1, so it will always play back at 1 speed, or normal speed.